Hey everybody, welcome to the briefing room. I'm Devin Dwyer in Washington. Great to have you with us here on ABC News Live. A lot of breaking news this hour up on Capitol Hill. We begin with a new phase in the impeachment inquiry into President Trump. Today, investigators hearing for the first time from a White House official, this man in a military uniform, Alexander Vindman. He's an Army officer, obviously decorated Iraq War veteran. He was on the Trump National Security Council at the White House as a Ukraine expert. He was on the line during that controversial phone call back in July when President Trump made that ask of Ukraine's president. We'll get into what testimony he has to say coming up, but also some breaking news right now. House Democrats have just released the text of a resolution that they plan to vote on Thursday, authorizing effectively their impeachment inquiry and also laying out the terms for open impeachment hearings coming up just in the next few weeks. This process, which has largely been behind closed doors, soon to be come out in the open. And our Kira Phillips is on Capitol Hill for us right now. Kira, this is a very significant move as we all get to take a look now what every member of the House of Representatives will vote on Thursday. This looks very much like an endorsement of the impeachment process.
Definitely. And matter of fact, we just got our hands on this about 15 minutes ago. So we've been pacing ourselves through it about the Democrats releasing this resolution outlining the impeachment probe process. Here's what I can tell you. It's an 8-page resolution, and it was submitted by Rules Committee Chairman James McGovern, Democrat of Massachusetts. It directs Democrat-led House panels to, quote, continue their ongoing investigations as part of the inquiry into whether sufficient grounds exist for the House of Representatives to exercise its constitutional power to impeach Trump. Now, Devin, it points out that, or I want to point out rather, this is just a draft. House Rules Committee members will mark this up tomorrow, suggesting changes, if any. So this is the first round before we really know what could happen on Thursday. 3 key points as we read through this. According to the resolution, number one, we're going to see open hearings by the Intelligence Committee, and that will be led by Chairman Adam Schiff. Something else to point out, Republicans will be able to question witnesses in these hearings as well. And then another note, electronic transcripts of all depositions thus far will be released, classified redactions, however. Pelosi will not, of course, allow this to hit the floor either, Devin, until she knows she has enough votes to pass this. So we'll see what happens.
This will be the first time that all members of the House will be put effectively on record on impeachment, so we will be watching that closely on Thursday. Meantime, speaking of depositions, Kira, this Alexander Vindman, not a household name, but a highly respected member of the military who was inside the administration. Tell us why his testimony today is so significant.
Well, let me tell you what, the optics alone really stood out today because he showed up here on the Hill in full dress, full military dress. And as you mentioned, he's a decorated combat veteran. He received the Purple Heart, and he's the national security staffer that's overseeing Ukraine policy. And this is another reason why he stands out today. He's the first White House official to testify on the Hill. He says he was on that call between President Trump and Ukrainian President Zelensky when Trump demanded that Ukraine investigate his 2020 rival Joe Biden. Here's what he said in his opening statement that we obtained. He said, "I did not think it was proper to demand that a foreign government investigate a U.S. citizen, and I was worried about the implications for the U.S. government's support of Ukraine." He also went on and said, "I realized that if Ukraine pursued an investigation into the Bidens and Burisma, it would likely be interpreted as a partisan play, which would undoubtedly result in Ukraine losing the bipartisan support it has thus far maintained. This would all undermine U.S. national security." Devin?
Kira, and one side of how potentially damaging this is to the president is how some Republicans have been responding to his testimony. They have been trashing the colonel, questioning his patriotism, even suggesting that he's a spy.
Yeah. And look, and that's coming from, I mean, that's a ridiculous notion, and that's coming from the fact that his family left Ukraine when he was a child. But I want to point back to his military career, his colorful military career, and a lot of the blowback against the criticism, and particularly the president, comes from President Trump's tweet. He took to social media, like he usually does, and just tore into the lieutenant colonel. He tweeted, "Why are people that I never even heard of testifying about this call. Just read the call transcript and the impeachment hoax is over. Ukraine said no pressure. The president going on to say, supposedly, according to the corrupt media, and the Ukraine call concerned today's never-Trumper witness. Was he on the same call that I was? Can't be possible. Please ask him to read the transcript of the call. Witch hunt. How many more never-Trumpers will be allowed to testify about a perfectly appropriate phone call when all anyone has to do is read the transcript? Now, GOP Representative Liz Cheney, also Democratic Senator Joe Manchin, calling these attacks by the president not only despicable, but shameful. Take a listen.
I think it's despicable for anybody, and especially elected official, to criticize an honored military veteran who served our country valiantly and basically was willing to sacrifice their life for us.
We need to show that we are better than that as a nation. Their patriotism, their love of country. We're talking about decorated veterans who have served this nation, who have put their lives on the line, and it is shameful to question their patriotism, their love of this nation, and we should not be involved in that process.
And Devin, just to add to that, I've talked to a number of members of Congress, both Democrats and Republicans. Other words that I heard them use today: unfortunate, absurd, and disrespectful, the way Vitamin is being treated.
Kira, thank you so much for your reporting. For more on this, I'm joined now by former two-term Republican Congresswoman Barbara Comstock, also the former chief counsel on the House Oversight Committee back during the Clinton impeachment. Barbara, it's great to see you.
Great to be with you.
I want you to sort of bring us back to ground earth here, big picture. We're all just over a month into this impeachment inquiry. Where do you think we stand right now? Do you think Democrats have put together a pretty compelling case, and is it a foregone conclusion that President Trump will be impeached?
Well, I think the Democrats initially, Nancy Pelosi said she wanted this to be a bipartisan process, and that is why she had resisted it for so long. But I think, unfortunately, they started on a very partisan tone, and Adam Schiff, certainly because of his involvement in previous investigations and claims that he had made, is certainly seen by Republicans as very partisan. So the doing hearings in secret, not doing a resolution, not having things public, that has been problematic so far. So now this is a new phase. The resolution is just out. I haven't had a chance to look at it and see how closely it compares to the previous Clinton and Nixon impeachments. When the Clinton impeachment was done in the 90s, we very much tried, the Judiciary Committee, really duplicate exactly what the Nixon was. So I think that for the next 24, before the Rules Committee meeting tomorrow, they will be looking at how closely that does line up, and if there are any amendments that they'll want to do. The Rules Committee ranking member is Tom Cole, who you saw in the picture with Liz Cheney. He is a very esteemed member, highly thought of on the Republican side, a very reasonable, seasoned member who is a good person to have in that position right now.
And somebody who's going to try to keep Republicans together, as you've talked about. They are protesting the process here.
Yes.
I didn't hear you talk about the substance of the allegations, but the process. How long does that hold? Are there any cracks here?
I think because of the way they started the procedures, the Republicans have really been focused on the process, and so the Democrats kind of gave them that. I haven't been able. I can't understand why they didn't have public hearings from the start. For example, today's hearing, they leaked out the testimony, but then they didn't have a public hearing. Why not? I think it would actually help the Democrats more, but I think it's their distrust of the public. And so that has actually helped the president and probably kept Republicans on board because of that. So
does that go away now that we're on the cusp of public hearings? Will that sort of disarm a lot of these Republicans?
Well, from my talking with folks, my impression is there will not be a lot of breaks. The Republicans will hold on this because they feel the entire process is unfair.
But how do they answer? Will they ever be forced to answer on the substance? Can they continue to dodge the actual substance here of the president asking a foreign government to investigate Joe Biden?
That's going to be the issue when they become public hearings, and then all of their constituents are going to see it. It's going to be a TV process because is even though a lot of these statements have been released, people haven't been sitting down and reading the 15-page statements that you or I have read.
Very unfamiliar
and
names.
And so, exactly. And so not having that in front of the public, I think, has probably not been helpful to the Democrats and has given the Republicans that opportunity. And I think really you now have a House that is very polarized on this issue, but in general. Last election, the moderates and those in the middle kind of got hollowed out.
Right.
So I think you will see Republicans stay together, certainly in the Rules Committee. On the House, I think on the House Republican side, the people to watch will be any of the members who might be retiring. Some of the
There are a lot of those.
Yes, and so, but it seems like even those will stay together on this.
Well, we do have a long way to go, although Democrats are trying to rush this through by Christmas. We were talking before the show about the timeline here. In this resolution that Nancy Pelosi just put out, there's a lot of talk of minority witnesses, giving Republicans the opportunity to bring people forward. And that could draw this out, right? This could really spoil the timeline if, in fact, Republicans put people forward.
Well, that's right. The Republicans want to hear from the whistleblower in some way or another, whether that's a shrouded witness or how they do it. Adam Schiff begging off on that has been something that I think Republicans will focus on.
So we'll have to see.
Yes.
You're not optimistic by Christmas.
Well, I think that it can drag out. Interestingly, the Clinton impeachment was on December 19th.
That's right.
There's some talk of it might be around that same time frame, right before Christmas.
It's going to be crazy town, just as the Iowa caucuses are getting underway.
Well, and then the problem in the Senate is how, when you start that, when will you be starting that? You have to have Supreme Court Chief Justice John Roberts available. And in the Clinton impeachment, that was about 5 weeks of testimony, which is going to get you right into
we have a long way to go, so we will see. Barbara Comstock, great to see you. Thanks for coming in. I appreciate the conversation. As always, staying on Capitol Hill now to the first congressional hearing since those 2 deadly crashes involving Boeing 737 MAX jets that cost 346 lives. It was embattled Boeing CEO Dennis Muilenburg in the hot seat today, facing tough questions over whether the company hid information about flaws in a critical flight system. But stealing the spotlight are these families. You see here holding up faces of the victims, those who died in crashes. That's inside the hearing room. Our David Curley caught up with some of the families to get their reaction after the testimony.
We are sorry, deeply and truly sorry. As a husband and father myself, I'm heartbroken by your losses. I know that probably doesn't offer much comfort and healing at this point, but I want you to know that we carry those memories with us every day.
I just want him to own the mistakes that they made and moving forward, admit that mistake and do something about it so that the accident will never happen again. We all make mistakes, but I think when you strike 2, that's not a mistake anymore.
My son was 1.5 years old, and he just started talking a few weeks before the crash. Tomorrow it can be you, it can be your families, it can be your wives and your kids. So that's why it's so important. For me, I flew here from Poland to represent my wife and my son, and also the safety of public transportation around the world.
David Curley, our chief transportation correspondent, joins me now. David, so powerful to hear from those families. Muilenburg today apologized profusely, said the company had made mistakes, but lawmakers were really frustrated with some of his answers.
And it was bipartisan pile-on from both the left and the right by senators. I didn't hear a positive word from any of them. They wanted to know a number of things. Why did Boeing conceal this from pilots? The pilots didn't know about this MCAS system that was put into the 737 MAX. Did they conceal information from the FAA in the certification process? And a lot of discussion about changing that certification process, which Congress passed about 13 years ago.
Let's take a listen to Senator Richard Blumenthal of Connecticut, who on that very point tore into Dennis Muilenburg. Take a listen.
My anger has only grown. These loved ones lost lives because of an accident that was not only preventable, as the chairman said at the very start, but was the result of a pattern of deliberate concealment. Boeing came to my office shortly after these crashes and said they were the result of pilot error. Those pilots never had a chance. These loved ones never had a chance. They were in flying coffins.
ABC Aviation consultant John Nance joins me on the phone now. John, wanted to get your reaction to what David was talking about, what we heard from the senator there. To what extent, on your assessment of these crashes, is Boeing liable for keeping this information out of the manuals? Or was that a key factor here?
Well, I vociferously disagree with Senator Blumenthal that the pilots had no chance. That's just balderdash. The pilots had followed the proper procedure. The crashes never would have occurred. This is as much a problem with pilot training worldwide as it is a problem with any decisions that were made during certification. And certainly it is reasonable and rational to re-examine periodically the designated engineering representative system by which the FAA and the airline, rather the manufacturers, operate. But to turn around and say, no, this was just a flying coffin, that's absolutely wrong. Yes, Boeing made some non-conservative decisions. There's no question about that. And they made those decisions primarily with the expectation that, well, if worst case, it's going to be a runaway pitch trim, and every pilot knows how to handle that. Well, obviously, we can no longer make that assumption.
David, it's a complicated picture, John, taking issue there with the senator's accusation. But as you've looked at this, and you've looked at some of the reporting from both of these countries, Indonesia, actually 1 year ago today, that Lion Air jet crashed, and Ethiopia, it was pilot error, it was issues with the plane development, it was a whole combination of things. It is, and every crash is like that. There's usually a chain of events. There is culpability and vulnerability for Boeing because of the way they designed the system and what they did tell or didn't tell the pilots. I have talked to several 737 pilots who have said, listen, there's the procedure. If this happens, you shut it off and you trim the plane by yourself, which they did in Indonesia the day before the first crash of the 737 MAX. So you have both at play here. There were issues with the way both crews handled the aircraft in the two crashes, and Boeing did put in a system, as Senator Tammy Duckworth said today, that took some control away from the pilots. Right. And Boeing always credits itself as being the manufacturer that lets the pilots fly the aircraft. Right. But this system would nose down the aircraft. The pilot would pull back or use his thumb to bring the nose back up, and then it did it again, and it did it again. So what's the big lesson that's learned here? Is the FAA going to be stricter in certifying planes going forward, or did they sort of get a bruising in this as well? Yes, they did at this first hearing, and this all happens again tomorrow on the House side. And DeFazio, who runs the committee on the House side, told me yesterday there will be changes to the way aircraft are certified in the United States. Easy to say, hard to get past. Once again, it's Congress who mandated the system that Boeing used with the FAA, so it will be up to Congress to change the system if it is going to be changed. And John Nance, before we let you go, the company said today they're close to certifying the plane, getting it back in the air. Would you be comfortable flying on that plane if you were a member of the public?
Anytime, any place, anywhere. That's my feeling, and that actually goes for the aircraft before modification, because I know how to turn off the pitch trim.
You know, Senator John Tester today said he would walk before he would get onto a Boeing 737. This is a Democrat. He would walk, and he says he thinks they're cutting corners and there will be changes. Wow, so a diversity of opinion on whether this plane is safe, although it's one of the most widely used, if not the most widely used passenger jet. It's got a brand issue right now, though. We will see. David Curley, thank you so much for coming in. Thanks to John Nance joining us from North Dakota. Well, if you've been following the rapidly changing U.S. role in Syria, you might have heard the president this week say that American forces are, in fact, staying inside that country to protect the oil. And in fact, yesterday, the president went even further, saying the U.S. will be keeping the oil.
We don't want to be a policeman in this case of two countries that haven't gotten along for centuries. But we're keeping the oil. Remember that. I've always said that. Keep the oil. We want to keep the oil. $45 million a month. Keep the oil. We've secured the oil.
Well, that claim raises a lot of big questions. Where is the oil? Who does it belong to? Can we just keep it? And why are we even there protecting it? I'm joined now by our State Department reporter, Connor Finnegan, and at the Pentagon, Elizabeth McLaughlin joins us. Elizabeth, I want to start with you. Let's keep this simple for folks. Start with a map. Where is the oil? What can you tell us about how big of an area we're talking about?
Yeah, so what you're looking at right now are the Conoco gas fields. They're located in eastern Syria along the Euphrates River Valley that runs east towards Iraq. Those fields are outside the town of Deir Zor. If that sounds familiar, that's because this is where U.S. forces backed up their Kurdish allies and fought back ISIS all the way from the northern part of Syria down the middle Euphrates River Valley east. So this is a very familiar area where these oil fields are located. And as you can see, over the last couple weeks, there's been a lot of whiplash, to say the least, of the Trump administration's Syria policy, now leading to the fact that we're going to keep as many as several hundred U.S. troops near these oil fields to keep them from falling into ISIS's hands.
And as we talk about oil production around the world, people think about their cars, they think about having to pump gas. We should remind everybody this is a very small comparative area of oil production, much of it a very small percentage staying largely in country. Connor Finnegan, who actually owns that oil in those two spots in Syria, how has it typically been sold?
Well, Devin, like any resource in any country, the oil there belongs to the sovereign government that is in Syria. But depending on where you are in Syria, I think it's really an open question of who has that control. As you said, at one point in time, it was ISIS that controlled these oil fields and made millions of dollars off of them. But at this moment in time, it is the Syrian Kurdish forces that have fought alongside the U.S. against ISIS and cleared the terror group from this terrain that have control of them. They have a very rudimentary oil production going now, and speaking to, really how difficult the situation and complicated situation in Syria is, they actually sell that oil back to the Assad government, even though that Assad government is under very strict U.S. sanctions.
So they're not shipping this across the globe to the United States by any stretch. But is there any sign that the U.S. is actually trying to take the oil right now? I mean, and what would it mean if we did?
Well, President Trump had made that pitch in the last couple of days. On Sunday, when he announced the death of Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, the ISIS leader, he said that ExxonMobil and some other American companies should go in and take this oil, and the U.S. should take some funds off of it. A senior State Department official told us yesterday, however, that it's really those Syrian Kurds right now who are in charge of production there, and that money will be used to support them and their local governance in the area. And importantly, if it were to go back to the U.S., if any funds were to go back to the U.S. would really open itself up to allegations of war crimes, in particular the term pillaging, which is the theft of any resource or other resource during a wartime, and it's prohibited strictly under both international treaties that the U.S. has ratified, including the 4th Geneva Convention, but also under U.S. law. The War Crimes Act of 1996 strictly prohibits these kinds of things. We've asked the White House for any more details of what President Trump was talking about. No response from them so far, and we've reached out to ExxonMobil and some other oil companies. No response there either.
So potentially exposing ourselves to war crimes if we do take the oil, though no evidence that that's happening yet. Elizabeth, real quickly, final thought to you. Big question a lot of people asking today is the president is sort of sending mixed messages, says we're not the world's policemen. Yet why are we there protecting this oil that belongs to the Syrians and that's largely kept in that country?
Yeah, I think that gets back to how confusing the Syria policy has been over the last couple weeks. At first, the U.S. was going to pull out 1,000 troops from northern Syria. First, they were going to go to western Iraq, and then they were going to come home. The next couple days later, we heard they couldn't stay in western Iraq, so now they were going to go back into maybe Syria to conduct counter-ISIS missions. Now the president's talking about keeping the oil, and the Pentagon pivots and says, okay, we're going to keep some troops there to guard these oil facilities, but they have to tie it back into the ISIS mission. That is why the U.S. is there in the first place, is to keep ISIS from resurging in Syria and in Iraq. And so that's what the line you're going to hear here in the building is this is not about keeping oil. It's about guarding it and keeping it from falling into ISIS's hands to be able to be used as a significant source of revenue for them. But this is a really, really complex situation on the ground. You have the Syrians, you have the Russians. And so what we heard from Defense Secretary Esper yesterday was that the U.S. has troops there. They have to be able to protect themselves. So look for that ability and mechanized forces there in the region going forward.
Really smart analysis. Elizabeth McLaughlin at the Pentagon. Thank you so much. Connor Finnegan at the State Department. Guys, great conversation on where the oil is and why it matters. Thank you both. Finally, we learned this week that a military service dog, a Belgian Malinois to be exact, was among the American heroes that went in to northern Syria on Sunday to take out the leader of ISIS. There he is. We don't know the dog's name yet. It's still top secret. But officials say it's one of nearly 2,000 dogs on assignment with service members in every branch of the United States military. So for more on who these dogs are, what their handlers do, what they do when they're retired, I'm joined now by a dog who is retired from the U.S. Army. Zumba joins us along with Zumba's handler, Christian Moore, who's president of Mission Canine that helps these dogs rehabilitate and reunite with their handlers. Kristen, thanks so much for joining us, and it's great to see Zumba. Tell us about Zumba's service.
Yeah, I'm not his handler, but we are taking care of him until we get him to a handler. But this is Zumba. He was retired Army, and he has come to us. He was supposed to go to his handler, who was in Germany at the time, so we took him into our care until that happened. But then the handler came back and can't take him, so we're finding another handler for him.
That's so great. And Zumba is a Belgian Malinois. What makes these dogs so uniquely suited for military service?
They have a high drive, which is really important. Their drive to find their toy, and that's what they train with, their toys. And that drive is very critical for them. And they're also extremely sturdy when it comes to their build. So they really work well in high energy, high drive, and their build makes them the perfect dog for the job.
And I imagine they do work in some pretty intense conditions in war zones, on raids. We've seen some video the past couple of days of these dogs strapped to their handlers. Look at that, jumping out of a plane with goggles on. I mean, there does seem to be a very big need to rehabilitate them, help them sort of get accustomed to civilian life, if you will. Tell us a little bit about what you do in that regard.
Yeah, we bring them into our care. The ones that don't have designated handlers, the ones that have designated handlers, we reunite them with their handlers. When the dog is retired, and let's say it's retired over in Germany or over in Japan or even on the West Coast and the handler's on the East Coast, it's up to the handler to get the dog to them, and so we take care of that. The dogs that don't have designated handlers come into our care, and at that point we rehab them, and we call ourselves unhandlers. What we're doing is we're taking them from a working life and backtracking and turning them into civilians. We're teaching them how to get along with other dogs because they've been very isolated. We're making sure their medical care is taken, as making sure that they're healthy and happy. And then some of them come back with PTSD, so we have to take time with them, see what their behaviors are, and get them settled in so that we can get them into a home life as quickly as possible. Really important work for some American heroes that don't get a lot of praise but are there on the front lines and actually involved with the takedown of two of the world's most wanted terrorists. It's pretty an incredible thing. Christian Moore with Mission Canine, thanks for the work you do, and thanks to the service of Zumba. Thanks to all of you for joining us here on the Briefing Room on this Wednesday. I'm Devin Dwyer in Washington. Hope to see you back here tomorrow at 3:30 Eastern Time. Until then, have a great afternoon.